I'm going to go over the basic UI of Maya and some camera controls. It's very important that you're in the right workspace when you are starting a project because Maya can do everything from modeling, rigging, animating, effects, and a lot more. In the top right, you have your workspace. When you first open Maya, it might default to General or Modeling Standard. General will be a basic overview with your attribute editor, outliner, and a few other things. If you go down to the Modeling Standard, it'll automatically open up your modeling toolkit. You also have workspaces for sculpting, pose sculpting, UVing, XGen, and a lot more. Most of my tutorials will be staying in the Modeling Standard workspace. In the top left, you have your another modeling option, and this changes this top menu up here. Right now it's set to modeling, so we have a lot of our curves, surfaces, deformers, and UVing tools. If this was set to rigging, we would have drop-down menus for rigging, animating, or whatever you are working on. This menu bar gives you a lot of the basic tools for what you are currently working in. For poly modeling, we have basic shape creation, type tool, pivot and deleting your history, and some basic commands. You also have tools for curves, sculpting, rigging, and animation. I will generally leave it for modeling standard, or when we're UVing, go into UV editing, as well as staying in modeling and poly modeling. On the left-hand side, we have the outliner, and this is a list of everything in your scene. By default, you have 4 cameras and some default light and object sets. On the right-hand side, we have the modeling toolkit, and we'll be using a lot of this menu further down the line. It gives you options for most of the basic and most common modeling tools, as well as some more advanced features. The attribute editor will be completely blank until you make an object, so I'm just going to make a cube real quick, and you can see that we now have options for our cube. This first tab will always be your translate, rotate, scale, and other basic information about the cube. These are its location in the 3D space. Next you have the shape node, and we won't be doing much in this class. Polycube 1, we'll go over more of this later, but this allows you to change some default attributes of your cube. Then you have the shading group, and finally the Lambert 1. Lambert 1 is the default material that is assigned to every single new object in Maya. You should never change much of Lambert 1. If you want it to be a darker or lighter gray, you can do that, but you'll never be loading in anything for the attributes of Lambert 1. Similar to the attribute editor, we also have the channel box. If you don't have your channel box, you can just hit this button in the top right, and it will give you a lot of very similar information as the attribute editor, just in a slightly different format. At the very bottom, we have layers, and there'll be another tutorial going over how to use layers to organize your scene. To rotate, move, and move your camera, it is very simple. On Windows, hold down Alt. On a Mac, you'll hold down Command. Hold it down and left click and hold, and you can rotate. Continuing holding down Alt, you have right click, and that will zoom in and out. And middle click will pan up, down, left, and right. You can also use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, but it's a little bit more jumpy. Using Alt and right click, it is a much smoother zoom. If you have multiple objects and you want to rotate around a different one, right now I'm rotating around this object, you can select your object and hit F, and that will focus on your object and move your camera, and now you'll be rotating solely around that object. If you have nothing selected and you hit F, your camera will zoom out and rotate around the center of both of them. If you hit spacebar, don't hold it down, just quickly hit it, you will change from your single camera view to having your orthographic cameras. Orthographic cameras don't show any perspective. So let's make a cube again. And in my perspective, if I go to the side and turn on wireframe, I can see the front and the back and the sides of this cube. In my orthographic views, I will not see any of that perspective. It is a flat view of my objects. If I want to maximize one of these cameras, hover over it with your mouse and quickly hit spacebar. The 4 cameras that you see here are the 4 cameras that you have in your outliner: perspective, top, front, and side. Sometimes your camera will act a little bit glitchy. It's rare, but it can happen. So if your perspective camera is ever not working, all you have to do is make a new one, and that is very simple. In the perspective window, come up to Panels, Perspective, and hit New, and it will create a new perspective camera for you. It won't delete the original one, but your perspective one will work just the same. You can do something very similar for orthographic cameras. Right now we have top, front, and side, and if you need to make a new top camera, come over to Panels, Orthographic, New, and then you have Top. Or if you need a bottom camera, which is not there by default, you can create a bottom orthographic. There are some very important things to make sure are turned on before you start working on a project, and those 3 things are your poly count, which is in the upper left, your view cube, which is in the upper right, and to make sure that you have undos turned on. To do so, it's all very easy. I'm going to go to, for the poly count, come up to Display, Heads Up Display, and Poly Count. And this will tell you how many vertices, edges, faces, triangles, and UVs are in your scene. As an example, right now I have 1 cube, and that 1 cube has 6 faces, 12 edges, 8 vertices, 12 triangles, and 14 UVs. If you don't know what that means yet, that is okay. I'm going to make another cube, and you can see that we have more numbers in our poly count. This first row will tell you how many you have in your scene as a whole. This first row does not matter what you have selected. It'll give you the entire scene. The second column will show you what you currently have selected, and it'll be that entire object. And the third column is your current selection. So if I go into face mode and select 1 face, I'll have 1 face selected, which is out of 6, and in the entire scene I have 12 faces. This is a very useful menu to have up when you have polygon limitations on a project, so you know how many you have in your scene. Next is the view cube, which may or may not default for you to be on. And to turn it on, come up to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Preferences. To turn it on, come to your view cube and just turn on Show the View Cube. If for some reason you do not have this option, it is not a big deal. You do not need the view cube to work on projects. It can just be nice to have. The next thing you need to do in the same Preferences menu is come down to where it says Undo and make sure that you have it set to On and Infinite. You should not have your undos turned to off.